Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the massive holographic display in the United Earth Command Center, watching as alien ships materialized in Earth's outer system. Each vessel dwarfed humanity's largest battleships, their sleek forms cutting through space with technology that seemed to mock every advancement humans had made in their brief journey to the stars. "Incoming transmission, Admiral," reported Lieutenant Torres, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "It's on all frequencies, every language, even our most secure military channels." "Put it through." The hologram shifted, displaying a creature that defied easy description. Tall and elegant, with crystalline features that seemed to shift between solid matter and pure energy. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Primitive species of Sol 3. I am High Archon Veltar of the Hegemony. Your existence has been deemed incompatible with galactic order. You have 72 of your planetary rotations to evacuate this system. Any who remain will be cleansed." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Admiral Chen had spent 30 years in the military, rising through the ranks during humanity's expansion to the outer colonies. She had seen war, famine, and the worst humanity could offer. But this was different. This was extinction, delivered with the casual indifference of someone swatting an insect. "Admiral," came the voice of Secretary General Martinez through the secure link from Geneva, "the Security Council is convening an emergency session. Every world leader is demanding answers we don't have." Chen turned to her senior staff. "Analysis." Commander Reeves, head of intelligence, cleared his throat. "Preliminary scans suggest energy signatures beyond our current understanding. Their smallest escort vessels output more power than our entire Earth defense grid. We're looking at technology that's perhaps centuries ahead of ours. Weapons? Unknown. But given their confidence in delivering ultimatums, we have to assume overwhelming firepower." Dr. Elena Vasquez, the chief xenobiologist who had been hastily summoned from the Lunar Research Station, stepped forward. "Admiral, I've been analyzing the transmission. The entity that spoke, this High Archon, showed no recognition of us as sentient beings. In their language patterns, they used terms typically reserved for discussing resource management or pest control. The implications hung heavy in the air. Humanity wasn't seen as a rival civilization or even a threat. They were simply an inconvenience to be removed." "Options?" Chen asked. "Diplomatic contact," suggested Commander Park from the Foreign Relations Division. "Perhaps if we could establish proper communication, make them understand our level of development, our potential contributions to galactic civilization." Chen nodded slowly. It was what she had expected. Humanity's first instinct had always been to talk, to negotiate, to find common ground. It was what had pulled them back from the brink of nuclear war decades ago, what had united the colonies under one banner, what had driven their peaceful expansion into space. "Draft a response," she ordered. "Full diplomatic protocols, offer of cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, anything that might make them reconsider." The next 48 hours became a frantic dance of diplomacy. Earth's greatest minds worked around the clock, crafting messages that showcased humanity's achievements, their art, their science, their potential as allies rather than obstacles. They transmitted mathematical proofs, samples of human music, historical records of their progress from a warlike species to a unified civilization that had largely abandoned warfare in favor of exploration and discovery. The response came exactly 70 hours after the original ultimatum. "Your attempts at communication have been noted and evaluated. Your species shows marginally more development than initially assessed, but this does not alter the decision. You have 44 rotations remaining." Dr. Vasquez worked feverishly to decode the subtext in the alien communication. "Admiral, they're not just dismissing us. The linguistic patterns suggest they see our development as quaint, like adults watching children play at being grown-ups." Keep trying, Chen ordered, though she could see the doubt creeping into her staff's faces. Messages continued to flow between Earth and the hegemony fleet. Humanity offered relocation assistance, proposed sharing sectors of space, even suggested serving in some capacity within their galactic order. Each response was a variation of the same theme: insufficient, irrelevant, denied. With 2 weeks remaining, Secretary General Martinez arrived at the command center in person. The man who had spent his career preventing conflicts looked haggard, aged beyond his years by the weight of species extinction hanging over his shoulders. "Sarah, the colonies are in chaos. New Geneva is demanding we fight. Mars Command is suggesting surrender might save at least some of humanity. The belt miners are talking about running for deep space." Admiral Chen stared at the tactical display showing the hegemony fleet maintaining perfect formation at the edge of their system. In 2 weeks, she had learned their ships were powered by controlled stellar manipulation, their weapons could crack planets, and their smallest scout craft carried the firepower to obliterate continents. "What do our war games show?" Martinez asked quietly. "Total annihilation within 6 hours of engagement," Commander Reeves reported. "We've run every scenario. Concentrated attacks on single targets, guerrilla strikes, even kamikaze runs with nuclear payloads. Nothing even scratches their shields." Dr. Vasquez looked up from her linguistic analysis workstation. "Secretary General, I've been studying their cultural markers in the communications. The hegemony appears to be a civilization that has transcended what they consider primitive behaviors: violence, competition, individual survival instincts. They've evolved beyond such things, which is why they can discuss our extermination so casually. To them, it's simply efficient resource management. And us? We're still primitive by their standards, still driven by what they see as base survival instincts." Martinez and Chen exchanged glances. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Humanity's greatest achievement, the thing they were most proud of, was learning to suppress those very instincts that the hegemony found so distasteful. "1 week remaining, Admiral," reported Lieutenant Torres. "The fleet is advancing to inter-system positions." Chen had barely slept in days. Every diplomatic avenue had been exhausted. Earth's greatest philosophers, negotiators, and scientists had thrown everything they had at the problem. The hegemony remained unmoved. "Admiral," Dr. Vasquez approached with a new report. "I've been analyzing their ship movements, their communication patterns, everything we've observed. I think I understand why they're giving us time." "Explain." "They're not being merciful. They're studying us. Every message we send, every response we make, it's all being cataloged and analyzed. They want to understand how a primitive species reacts to inevitable extinction. We're not just being exterminated, we're being documented." The command center fell silent. Humanity wasn't even seen as worthy of a quick death. They were specimens in an experiment. 3 days remaining, Torres announced, his voice now hollow. "Fleet reaching orbital bombardment positions." Secretary General Martinez stood before the window overlooking Lake Geneva. The peaceful waters reflected the lights of the city where humans had once gathered to prevent wars, to protect the innocent, to build a better world. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." Admiral Chen joined him at the window. "If we weren't civilized," Martinez continued, "if we hadn't spent the last century learning to resolve conflicts peacefully, to think before we act, to consider consequences, what would we do differently?" Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Sir? Our military leaders keep talking about how outmatched we are technologically. But what if technology isn't everything? What if there's something about being human, something we've been trying to evolve past, that might actually be useful here?" Admiral Chen thought about her grandfather, who had fought in the last global conflict before humanity learned to settle disputes through negotiation. He had told her stories that the history books glossed over, stories about how human beings responded when their backs were truly against the wall. Sir, are you asking me to recommend we abandon every principle our civilization was built on? I'm asking if those principles are worth maintaining if they guarantee our extinction. Through the window, they could see civilians going about their daily lives, many still believing their leaders would find a solution. Parents pushing children on swings, couples sharing meals at outdoor cafes, students debating philosophy at sidewalk tables. All of it would be gone in 3 days unless something changed. Dr. Vasquez approached with yet another communication analysis. Secretary General Admiral, I've been reviewing every interaction we've had with the hegemony. There's something I missed before. She pulled up linguistic pattern charts on her tablet. Look at their responses when we mentioned our historical conflicts, our weapons development, our military history. There's a subtle change in syntax, almost like curiosity? No, that's not right. It's more like recognition. What do you mean? I think they know we're capable of violence. They know we used to be a warlike species, but they're convinced we've evolved past it, that we've become what they consider properly civilized. They're not taking any special precautions against us because they believe we're no longer capable of being primitive. Admiral Chen felt something shift inside her chest. Something she hadn't felt since her grandfather's stories had given her nightmares as a child. It was the recognition of what human beings were truly capable of when survival was at stake. 2 days remaining, reported a new voice over the comm system. Commander Jackson from the Lunar Defense Station. Admiral, we're picking up strange energy readings from their ships. It looks like they're beginning to charge some kind of planetary bombardment weapons. Secretary General Martinez turned from the window. The debate was over. Civilization, diplomacy, and peaceful coexistence had failed. Now there was only one question left. Admiral Chen, I'm authorizing any actions you deem necessary for species survival. Whatever we have to become, whatever we have to do, whatever lines we have to cross. This is where our civility ends. Admiral Chen looked around the command center at faces that had spent weeks trying to save humanity through reason and negotiation. Now those same faces were beginning to show something else, something harder and older and infinitely more dangerous. Dr. Vasquez, I need everything we know about their ships, their technology, their weaknesses. Admiral, they don't appear to have any weaknesses our current technology can exploit. Then we don't use our current technology. Commander Reeves accessed the sealed military archives. Everything we banned, everything we swore never to use again, every weapon system we dismantled because it was too horrible for civilized warfare. Ma'am, most of those projects were theoretical, abandoned because they violated every treaty we've signed. The treaties don't apply to beings trying to exterminate us. Park, I need you to contact every colony, every mining station, every research facility. Tell them to stop acting like diplomats and start remembering what humans did to survive for 200,000 years before we learned to be nice to each other. As the orders went out, Admiral Chen realized they were about to discover something the hegemony hadn't considered. Yes, humanity had evolved beyond casual violence. Yes, they had learned to resolve conflicts peacefully. But that evolution wasn't the replacement of their survival instincts. It was simply a layer built over them. And when that layer was stripped away by the absolute certainty of extinction, what remained wasn't a civilized species trying to fight a war. It was something much older, much more persistent, and much more dangerous than their would-be exterminators could possibly imagine. The change began in the deep archives beneath the Lunar Research Facility, where Commander Lisa Park had spent 18 hours straight downloading files that had been sealed for 60 years. Projects with names like Lazarus Protocol, Thanatos Vector, and Pandora's Theorem filled her screens, each one representing humanity's capacity for creative destruction that they had hoped never to use again. "My God," she whispered, reading through documentation on something called the Chimera Directive. We actually built this? Dr. Vasquez's voice came through the comm from Earth. Commander Park, Admiral Chen needs everything we have on biological warfare, psychological operations, and what the old files called asymmetric nightmare scenarios. Apparently, our great-grandparents were very creative when it came to killing things. On Mars, Colonel Wei Jiang was having a very different conversation with the mining unions. I don't care if it violates the Environmental Protection Accords. I need you to jury-rig every mining laser, every excavation charge, every piece of heavy equipment you have, and I need it done without regard for safety protocols. Colonel, you're talking about turning civilian equipment into weapons. The power couplings alone could kill half my crew if they fail. The aliens will kill all of your crew in 36 hours if we don't try something. Your choice. In the asteroid belt, Captain Maria Santos was explaining to a group of very confused miners why she needed them to deliberately destabilize their operations. You want us to what? Asked Foreman Jake Morrison, who had spent 20 years making sure asteroid mining was safe and efficient. I want you to turn every mining platform in this belt into a guided projectile, rig the fusion reactors to overload, program the navigation computers for collision courses, and evacuate the crews to the inner system. Captain, those platforms are worth billions of credits each, and some of them have been in my family for generations. Your family won't exist if this doesn't work. The transformation wasn't just technological. Dr. Elena Vasquez found herself working with people she would never have imagined collaborating with in normal circumstances. Dr. Marcus Crowe, whose research into weaponized pathogens had been banned by every civilized nation, was suddenly the most valuable scientist in the system. Dr. Vasquez, the beautiful thing about biological weapons, Dr. Crowe explained with disturbing enthusiasm, is that they're self-replicating. One successful delivery system, one ship, even one boarding party, and the target becomes a vector for its own destruction. But we don't know anything about their biology. How can we create something that will affect them? We don't need to know their biology. We need to know their ships, organic matter, metal fatigue, computer viruses that evolve, systems that corrupt themselves. The old researchers called it technological cancer, make the enemy's tools turn against them. Admiral Chen had moved her command center to a bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, a facility that hadn't been used since humanity's last global war. Around her, screens showed activity across the entire solar system as humans remembered skills they had hoped to forget. "Status report," she ordered. Commander Reeves looked up from a console that was displaying data streams from a dozen different operations. The belt miners have rigged 47 platforms for kamikaze runs. Mars has weaponized every piece of industrial equipment they have. The lunar facilities are producing something they're calling gray goo with attitude, and I don't want to know what that means. What about Earth? Dr. Crow's team has developed 17 different self-replicating attack vectors that target everything from ship hulls to computer systems. Dr. Park has managed to revive some kind of quantum virus that supposedly makes technology turn against itself, and the Psychological Warfare Division has come up with something they're calling cognitive terrorism. Admiral Chen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground facility's temperature. Explain that last one. They're planning to transmit the complete history of human warfare directly into the hegemony ship's communication systems. Every battle, every atrocity, every creative way we've ever found to kill each other, presented as a continuous data stream designed to overwhelm their understanding of what they're dealing with. Will it work? Unknown, but the psychological profile suggests the hegemony sees violence as a primitive behavior that advanced species grow beyond. Confronting them with the full scope of human creativity in warfare might shock them. On the observation deck of the UES Defiance, humanity's newest and largest battleship, Captain Rodriguez watched the hegemony fleet through enhanced telescopic displays. The alien ships maintained their perfect formation, elegant and serene. weapons charging with the slow deliberation of beings who had never encountered meaningful resistance. "Captain," reported Lieutenant Foster, "we're receiving new orders from Admiral Chen. It's unusual." Rodriguez read the message twice before understanding hit him. "They want us to ram them?" "Not exactly, sir. They want us to make them think we're going to ram them, then do something else entirely. It's part of something called tactical misdirection through apparent desperation." "I don't understand." "Neither do I, sir. But apparently, it involves making the enemy think they understand our tactics while we do something completely different." Dr. Vasquez had been working for 30 hours straight, analyzing every communication from the hegemony for clues about their psychology, their expectations, their blind spots. What she found was disturbing in its implications. "Admiral," she reported during the latest strategy session, "I think I know why they're so confident. They're not just technologically superior, they're psychologically unprepared for dealing with a species that refuses to accept defeat rationally." Explain. "Every species they've encountered before has either submitted immediately upon seeing their technological superiority or fought using predictable military tactics and been easily defeated. They've never dealt with a species that responds to certain defeat by becoming irrational." Admiral Chen leaned forward. "Are you saying they think we're crazy?" "I'm saying they don't have a framework for understanding our response. Look at their communication patterns. They keep referencing our persistent illogical behavior and failure to accept rational outcomes. They expected us to either surrender or fight conventionally and lose. Instead, we're doing things they can't predict because we're not following their model of how civilized beings behave." Commander Reeves pulled up tactical displays showing the increasingly chaotic human preparations. "Ma'am, if Dr. Vasquez is right, then our apparent disorganization might actually be an advantage. We're not following any strategic doctrine they recognize." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. James Harrison, a game theory specialist from the University of New Geneva, had been analyzing the situation as if it were an elaborate simulation. His conclusion was as simple as it was terrifying. "Admiral Chen, the hegemony is playing a game with rules they understand, but we're not playing their game anymore. We're playing a completely different game, and they don't know what the rules are because we're making them up as we go." "What kind of game are we playing?" "Survival at any cost. No rules, no limits, no consideration for anything except continuing to exist. It's the most primitive game in the universe, and they've forgotten how to play it." The first test of humanity's new approach came when a small hegemony scout ship detached from the main fleet to conduct what appeared to be final reconnaissance. Captain Santos, commanding a converted mining vessel called the Iron Will, intercepted it using a tactic that would have been considered suicidal by any military academy. Instead of engaging in ship-to-ship combat, she deliberately allowed the hegemony vessel to disable her ship's weapons and prepare for what they apparently expected to be a routine destruction. At the last moment, the Iron Will's crew activated mining charges that had been welded to the hull, turning their own ship into a massive fragmentation grenade at point-blank range. The hegemony scout ship survived the explosion, its shields absorbing most of the damage. But something else happened that nobody had anticipated. "Admiral," reported Captain Santos from an escape pod, "their ship stopped moving. It's just sitting there. Damage assessment? Minimal physical damage. But they're transmitting continuously on all frequencies. Dr. Vasquez, you need to hear this." The transmission was unlike anything they had received from the hegemony before. Instead of the calm, authoritative tone they had grown accustomed to, this was rapid, almost frantic communication filled with unfamiliar terminology. Dr. Vasquez worked feverishly to translate. "Admiral, this is remarkable. They're reporting to their fleet about unprecedented behavior patterns and illogical tactical decisions. But more than that, they're expressing something I can only interpret as confusion. They're confused by a kamikaze attack? No, they're confused by a failed kamikaze attack. They can't understand why we would sacrifice a ship and crew for no tactical gain. In their analysis, our behavior serves no rational purpose, which means they can't predict what we'll do next. The reports continued throughout the day as human operations across the system began to show results in ways nobody had expected. The weaponized mining platforms weren't particularly effective against hegemony shields, but their unpredictable flight patterns and willingness to ram targets at random intervals was apparently causing what Dr. Vasquez translated as navigational anxiety among the alien fleet. More disturbing to the hegemony was humanity's apparent disregard for their own survival. When a human ship was damaged, instead of retreating for repairs, they seemed to become more aggressive. When faced with certain destruction, they didn't surrender or flee. They tried increasingly desperate and irrational tactics. "Admiral," Dr. Vasquez reported after analyzing the latest batch of hegemony communications, "they're starting to change their approach. Instead of maintaining formation and proceeding with systematic bombardment, they're hesitating." Hesitating how? "They've started conducting additional scans of our ships and installations. They're trying to understand what we're doing because they can't predict our responses. For the first time in this encounter, they're reacting to us instead of simply proceeding with their plan." Admiral Chen studied the tactical displays showing the scattered, chaotic, and utterly uncoordinated human response to annihilation. By every measure of military science, it was a disaster. Ships operating independently, attacks launched without coordination, tactics that made no sense from any strategic perspective. "Dr. Vasquez, you said they've transcended primitive behaviors. What if that's not an advantage? What if they've become so civilized, so logical, so rational, that they can't cope with an opponent who refuses to be rational?" It's possible. Their entire approach assumes that all intelligent species will eventually recognize the futility of resistance and either submit or withdraw. But we're not withdrawing, and we're not submitting. We're just persisting. The word hung in the air like a revelation. Persistence. Not intelligence, not technology, not superior tactics. Just the simple, primitive, utterly irrational refusal to stop fighting even when defeat was mathematically certain. "Commander Reeves, how many species have the hegemony conquered?" According to their transmissions, they've incorporated over 4,000 species into their order. "How many of those species fought back?" "Unknown, but from their confidence level, I would guess very few offered meaningful resistance." Admiral Chen looked around the command center at faces that showed exhaustion, determination, and something else. Something that their ancestors would have recognized immediately, even if modern humans had almost forgotten it existed. "They've never encountered a species that doesn't know when to quit," she realized. "Every other species they've met has been rational enough to surrender when continued resistance was pointless. But we're not rational anymore. We're desperate. And desperate humans are the most dangerous thing in the universe because we stop caring about everything except survival." Dr. Vasquez pulled up a new analysis of hegemony communications. "Admiral, they're requesting instructions from some kind of higher authority. This situation appears to be unprecedented in their experience. How long until their planetary bombardment weapons are fully charged?" 18 hours. Admiral Chen stood and looked around the room at the humans who had spent the last week systematically abandoning every principle their civilization had been built on. They had violated treaties, dismantled safety protocols, weaponized civilian equipment, revived forbidden technologies, and prepared to fight a war using tactics that no sane military strategist would ever recommend. And somehow, impossibly, it was working. Not because they were winning, but because they were changing the nature of the conflict itself. All stations, all ships, all facilities. This is Admiral Chen with new orders. Stop trying to defeat them. Stop trying to damage their ships. Stop trying to win. Instead, I want you to show them exactly what humans become when we stop being civilized. Make them understand that destroying us won't end this. It will only make us worse. The final 12 hours began with what should have been humanity's last stand, but had become something else entirely. Something that no military academy in the galaxy could have prepared the hegemony for. High Archon Veltar stood before the quantum display in his flagship's command nexus, studying data streams that made no sense according to 4,000 years of military doctrine. The primitive species of Sol 3 should have been reduced to cosmic dust hours ago, but somehow they had transformed a simple extermination into something unprecedented. "Status report," he commanded, his crystalline features shifting with patterns that indicated deep confusion. "High Archon," reported Sub-Coordinator Zek. "The human vessels continue to operate despite sustaining damage that should have rendered them non-functional. Their tactics show no coherent strategy, yet they persist in attacking our formations. Casualties? Minimal to our forces. However, the humans continue to sacrifice their vessels at an alarming rate while accomplishing no tactical objectives. Then why haven't we proceeded with planetary sterilization?" The question hung in the perfect atmosphere of the command nexus. The truth was that the hegemony fleet had never encountered a species that reacted to certain death by becoming more aggressive rather than seeking survival through surrender. "High Archon, the humans are demonstrating behavior patterns that our psychological models cannot predict. Each action we take to end the conflict results in escalated responses that serve no rational purpose." Admiral Chen was no longer in the mountain bunker. She had transferred to the UES Defiance, not because it was safer, but because she wanted to be as close to the enemy as possible when humanity revealed what they had become. "Dr. Vasquez, report on hegemony communications." "Admiral, they're experiencing something I can only describe as cognitive dissonance. They keep referencing our impossible persistence and irrational dedication to futile outcomes. More importantly, they've requested guidance from something they call the central consciousness." "What's that?" "Near as I can tell, it's some kind of collective decision-making entity that guides hegemony policy. They've never had to consult it during an extermination before." Commander Reeves looked up from the tactical display. "Admiral, the latest reports from across the system are disturbing." "How so?" "The biological warfare teams have successfully introduced 17 different self-replicating agents into hegemony ships. Not one of them has caused significant damage, but they're evolving, mutating, becoming things we didn't design them to become." Admiral Chen felt a chill. "Are you saying our weapons are developing beyond our control?" "I'm saying our weapons are learning from their environment. Dr. Crow's theoretical technological cancer has begun adapting to hegemony defenses in real time. It's not destroying their ships, but it's making them unreliable." The truth was becoming clear across the hegemony fleet. The humans weren't trying to win in any traditional sense. They were trying to survive by making the cost of exterminating them higher than anyone had ever imagined possible. Captain Santos, now commanding her third ship after the previous two had been destroyed in increasingly creative ways, received orders that would have resulted in court-martial under normal circumstances. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. New operational directive. Stop trying to inflict damage. Start trying to inflict uncertainty. Make them afraid to predict what we'll do next." "Ma'am, how do we make a technologically superior enemy afraid?" "By showing them that defeating us is impossible not because we're strong, but because we refuse to recognize defeat when we see it." The breakthrough came when Dr. Marcus Crow's biological weapons achieved something nobody had thought possible. Instead of attacking the hegemony ships directly, they had begun attacking the concepts of order and predictability that the ship's systems depended on. "Admiral," reported Dr. Crow from his mobile lab aboard a converted cargo hauler, "our weapons have stopped being weapons in any traditional sense. They're now infectious ideas." "What do you mean?" "The hegemony ships run on principles of perfect order, logical systems, and predictable outcomes. But our agents are introducing chaos at the quantum level, not physical damage, but conceptual corruption. Their systems are still functional, but they're no longer certain of anything." The implications were staggering. The hegemony had built their entire civilization on the concept that sufficiently advanced intelligence could solve any problem through rational analysis. But humans had introduced something that couldn't be solved because it wasn't a problem in any logical sense. "Dr. Vasquez, are you getting this?" "Admiral, the hegemony communications are becoming increasingly frantic. They're reporting that human behavior has introduced logical paradoxes into their tactical systems. Their computers can't generate reliable predictions because we keep doing things that don't make sense." High Archon Veltar was experiencing something he had no framework for understanding. For the first time in 4 millennia of existence, he was confronting a problem that rational analysis could not solve. "Sub-Coordinator, explain to me why the humans continue to fight." "High Archon, they appear to be operating under the assumption that continued existence is preferable to rational surrender. Even when continued existence is mathematically impossible? That is illogical." "Yes, High Archon, that appears to be the point. The central consciousness had never been consulted about a species that refused to behave according to logical principles. When Veltar transmitted the complete tactical situation, the response was unprecedented in hegemony history. Analysis incomplete. Human behavior patterns do not conform to any known models of intelligent species' response to superior force. Recommend caution." Caution. The central consciousness, which had guided the hegemony through successful encounters with 4,000 species, was recommending caution when dealing with a primitive civilization that should have been exterminated days ago. Admiral Chen received the news while watching the latest human attack unfold. 3 mining platforms, their fusion reactors deliberately destabilized, were approaching a hegemony cruiser in formation that made no tactical sense whatsoever. "Admiral," reported Captain Rodriguez from the lead platform, "we're not actually going to ram them. We're going to detonate our reactors just close enough to create an interference field that might disrupt their shields for about 30 seconds. What tactical advantage does that provide? None whatsoever, but we'll have proven that we can get close enough to their ships to do it, and they'll have to wonder what we might try next." The attack proceeded exactly as planned. The hegemony cruiser's shields flickered for precisely 29 seconds, no damage was inflicted, and the 3 human platforms were completely destroyed. By every measure of military effectiveness, it was a complete failure, but something else happened that changed everything. "Admiral," Dr. Vasquez reported with excitement that bordered on hysteria, "the hegemony cruiser has withdrawn from its formation. It's moving to a position farther from our remaining forces." "They're retreating?" "No. They're maintaining distance. They've calculated that we can get close enough to threaten them, even though we can't actually damage them. They're responding to the possibility of threat rather than actual threat." Admiral Chen stared at the tactical display as the implications hit her. "They're afraid." "Not afraid of being destroyed. Afraid of not being able to predict what we'll do. Their entire military doctrine is based on controlling outcomes through superior technology and rational strategy. But we've introduced an element they can't control: irrational persistence. The transformation of the conflict was complete when humanity deployed what Dr. Crow had begun calling mimetic warfare. Instead of attacking hegemony ships, they began broadcasting the complete history of human conflict directly into their communication systems. Not the sanitized version taught in schools, but the real history. Every war crime, every act of desperate brutality, every time humans had done the impossible because they refused to accept that it couldn't be done. Stories of soldiers who fought with broken bones, sailors who refused to abandon sinking ships, pilots who flew missions they knew they wouldn't survive, civilians who chose torture over surrender. The psychological impact on the hegemony was immediate and devastating. "High Archon," Sub-Coordinator Zek reported with patterns that indicated severe distress. "The human transmissions are disturbing our crew efficiency." How so? "They detail behaviors that violate every principle of rational self-preservation. Our personnel are having difficulty processing the concept of a species that willingly chooses suffering over logical alternatives." High Archon Veltar accessed the human transmissions directly against the advice of his psychological specialists. What he found challenged everything he understood about intelligent life. The humans weren't just persistent. They were demonstrating a willingness to endure any amount of suffering, accept any level of loss, and continue fighting long past the point where victory was impossible. More disturbing was their apparent ability to find meaning and even satisfaction in hopeless resistance. For the first time in his existence, Veltar began to question whether the hegemony's model of rational civilization was truly superior to what the humans represented. "Sub-Coordinator, what would be required to completely exterminate the human species?" "Standard planetary sterilization protocols should be sufficient for their worlds. However, they have dispersed populations throughout this system, and some vessels have departed for deep space. Complete extermination would require pursuit operations that could take considerable time." "How long?" "Given their demonstrated persistence and willingness to sacrifice everything for survival, possibly decades." "And High Archon, they've demonstrated the ability to adapt our technology for their own use. They're not just surviving our attacks. They're learning from them." The final revelation came when humanity's last, desperate gambit reached fruition. Dr. Park's team had managed to create something they called a quantum empathy virus, a self-replicating information pattern that forced any intelligence that encountered it to experience human emotional responses. When it penetrated the hegemony ship networks, the effect was immediate and profound. For the first time in 4,000 years of evolution beyond primitive emotions, the hegemony was forced to feel what humans felt: the desperate love for life, the willingness to sacrifice everything for future generations, the terrible joy of fighting against impossible odds. "High Archon!" Sub-Coordinator Zek's communication was flooded with emotional patterns the hegemony had forgotten existed. "I'm experiencing, I don't know what to call it. The humans call it hope, but it's accompanied by terrible determination and love for beings I will never meet." Across the hegemony fleet, similar reports flooded in. Crew members were experiencing human emotions and finding their logical analysis corrupted by feelings they had no framework for processing. High Archon Veltar felt it too. The burning need to protect something greater than himself, the willingness to die rather than submit, the terrible, beautiful persistence that drove humans to continue fighting when all reason said they should surrender. Central consciousness, he transmitted, with patterns that would have been impossible days earlier. Request immediate guidance. The humans have introduced complications that our standard protocols cannot address. The response took longer than any in hegemony history. When it came, it contained words that had never before appeared in central consciousness communications. Human species exhibits unprecedented resistance to rational extermination. Cost of complete elimination, uncertain. Strategic value of elimination, questionable. Recommendation, evaluate alternative approaches to Sol system management. Admiral Chen was leading the final human attack when the hegemony transmission arrived. Her ship was surrounded by the wreckage of dozens of human vessels. Her crew was exhausted beyond rational function, and she was personally piloting a ship held together by welded plates and desperate engineering. "Incoming transmission from the Hegemony fleet," reported Lieutenant Torres, who had somehow survived 3 ship destructions and was now operating from a station that sparked with every button press. "Put it through." High Archon Veltar appeared on the damaged holographic display, but something had changed. His crystalline features showed patterns that indicated emotional states the Hegemony had supposedly evolved beyond. "Human Admiral Chen," he began, and his voice carried undertones of something that might have been respect. "The Hegemony Central Consciousness has completed analysis of your species. And you are classified as unsuitable for standard incorporation protocols. Your persistence patterns and willingness to accept losses exceed all known parameters for rational behavior." Admiral Chen felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. "Are you withdrawing?" "We are reconsidering our approach. The cost of complete human extermination has been calculated as potentially exceeding the strategic value of this system. Additionally, your species has demonstrated capabilities that the Hegemony finds instructive." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. "What kind of capabilities?" "The ability to continue functioning in the absence of logical hope, to persist beyond rational limits, to sacrifice immediate survival for long-term species continuation. These are skills that the Hegemony has not encountered in 4,000 years of expansion." The negotiation that followed was unlike any in human history, not because of what was agreed to, but because of what the agreement represented. The Hegemony would not exterminate humanity. Instead, they would establish what they called quarantine protocols around the Sol system. Humans would be allowed to continue existing, but with restrictions on expansion that would prevent them from contaminating other species with their irrational persistence. In return, humanity would provide the Hegemony with something they had forgotten they needed: the ability to fight against impossible odds. "You want us to serve as mercenaries?" Admiral Chen asked. "Not mercenaries," Veltar replied, and his voice carried undertones of something that might have been embarrassment. "Consultants. There are situations where rational analysis proves insufficient, where problems require solutions that logical beings cannot conceive. The Hegemony has encountered 17 such situations in the past millennium. In each case, we were forced to withdraw rather than find resolution." Dr. Vasquez understood first. "You're admitting that being rational has limitations. We are acknowledging that your species possesses capabilities that complement our own. Your willingness to attempt impossible tasks, to continue in the absence of hope, to sacrifice everything for minimal advantage. These are not logical behaviors, but they are effective under certain circumstances." The treaty was signed 3 months later, after extensive negotiations that established humanity as the Hegemony's impossible problem specialists. Humans would remain in the Sol system, but would be called upon when the Hegemony encountered situations that rational analysis could not resolve. Admiral Chen stood in the observation deck of the rebuilt UES Defiance, watching Hegemony ships conducting joint training exercises with human vessels. The aliens were learning human tactics, not the weapons or technology, but the mindset that made humans continue fighting when logic said they should stop. "Any regrets?" asked Secretary General Martinez, who had aged a decade in the past year. "About abandoning our principles to survive? About proving that sometimes civilization is a luxury we can't afford? About showing the galaxy that humans are the species you call when you need someone crazy enough to attempt the impossible?" She watched a human frigate demonstrate a ramming attack to a group of confused Hegemony tactical specialists. "No regrets, but I do wonder what we've become." "We've become what we always were," Dr. Vasquez said, joining them at the observation window. The only species in the galaxy too stubborn to know when we're beaten. The only civilization that treats impossible odds as a challenge rather than a reason to surrender. Admiral Chen nodded, watching the joint exercises continue. Humanity had survived by abandoning everything they thought made them civilized, only to discover that their most primitive trait, the simple refusal to give up, was what made them indispensable. Dr. Vasquez, do you think we'll ever go back to being civilized? I think we've learned that civilization and persistence don't have to be mutually exclusive. We can be rational, peaceful, and diplomatic most of the time. But now everyone knows what happens when we stop being civilized. And what's that? We become the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because we're stronger or smarter, but because we're the only ones who refuse to accept that some fights can't be won. In the depths of space, hegemony exploration fleets were already requesting human advisors for missions into unknown territories where logic and superior technology might not be sufficient. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the most advanced strategy was to send in the species that was too primitive to understand why something couldn't be done. And humanity, having proven that civility was a choice rather than an evolution, settled into their new role as the universe's specialists in impossible tasks. After all, when the entire galaxy needs someone crazy enough to fight unwinnable wars, who else would you call but the species that spent 200,000 years surviving by refusing to know when they were beaten? This was where humanity's civility had ended. What remained was something far more dangerous and infinitely more valuable. The knowledge that some things were worth fighting for even when victory was impossible. And sometimes, that was the only victory that mattered.